Imagine you are holding a ticking time bomb. Now, imagine someone hands you a baby and tells you that the only way to defuse the bomb is to pretend it isn't ticking, smile for the neighbors, and never, ever leave the room. Welcome to the reality of parenting through domestic violence. That is arguably the darkest, most accurate metaphor to start with. It perfectly captures the paralyzing paradox victims face. Society loves to ask, why didn't they just leave? But when you add children to the mix, leaving isn't just walking out a door. It is a high-stakes hostage negotiation where the currency is your child's physical and psychological safety. Exactly. And today, we are running a full global intelligence report on this. We are looking at the morality of staying versus leaving when love turns violent, specifically through the lens of the most populated countries across all 7 continents. Because spoiler alert, the rules of this horrific game change depending on where you are standing, but the house almost always wins. Let's start in North America, the United States. Land of the free, home of the brave, and ground zero for one of the most baffling legal paradoxes on earth. Yes, the American family court system. If we are talking about intelligence reports, this one is flagged in red ink. In the US, if you stay with an abusive partner, Child Protective Services can actually charge you with failure to protect and take your kids away. So, the logical move is to leave, right? Right. You pack the bags, you make the break, you are the hero. Except, when you get to family court to fight for custody, if you mention the abuse, you are frequently accused of parental alienation. The court often views the victim as hostile or uncooperative for trying to keep the kids away from the abuser. Abusers actually win full or joint custody at terrifyingly high rates in the US when the protective parent raises domestic violence claims. You are penalized for staying, and you are penalized for leaving. It is a bureaucratic trap perfectly designed by Kafka himself. It is like the legal system is a referee that only blows the whistle on the player who just got tackled. So, the morality of leaving in the US isn't just about bravery, it is a terrifying gamble. Do I stay and act as a human shield so I can monitor the kids 24/7, or do I leave and risk the court handing them over to a monster every other weekend unsupervised? Exactly. And that human shield dynamic is universal, but it takes on a completely different flavor when we move south. Let's look at South America, specifically Brazil. Brazil actually has some of the most progressive domestic violence legislation on the planet. The Maria da Penha law is practically a masterpiece of legal drafting. I sense a massive but hovering right over that statement. A colossal but. It is a masterpiece on paper, but in reality, you are dealing with a deeply entrenched culture of machismo. The morality of staying in Brazil is heavily influenced by economic dependency and a societal wink and nod to male dominance. You might have a state-of-the-art legal umbrella, but it is made entirely of tissue paper when the monsoon hits. The police are often underfunded or unsympathetic, meaning leaving can trigger a catastrophic escalation in violence. For many mothers, staying is a calculated, chilling survival strategy. They aren't weak. They are playing a lethal game of chess where giving up their own bodily autonomy is the price of keeping a roof over their children's heads. Which brings up a fascinating, albeit depressing, philosophical point. We often view staying as a moral failure, a lack of courage. But in many of these cultural contexts, staying is an act of supreme, agonizing sacrifice. It is the ultimate martyrdom. Precisely. And if you want to talk about societal winks and nods, let's cross the Atlantic to Europe. Let's look at Russia. In 2017, Russia actually decriminalized first-time domestic battery, provided it doesn't cause substantial bodily harm. Wait, just so we are totally clear on the intelligence briefing here, the government looked at domestic violence and essentially said, everybody gets one free brutalization. That is essentially the policy. As long as you don't break bones or put someone in a coma on the first try, it is an administrative offense. Like a parking ticket. They framed it as protecting traditional family values. There is a terrifying old Russian proverb. If he beats you, it means he loves you. Because nothing says romance quite like a state-sanctioned concussion. Exactly. So imagine the morality of leaving in that environment. You are not just fighting your abuser, you are fighting a state apparatus that has officially classified your suffering as a minor family tradition. If you leave, you are the one breaking up the family. You are the traitor to tradition. The psychological weight placed on the mother to just endure for the sake of the family unit is astronomical. It is institutionalized gaslighting. And speaking of the weight of the family unit, that transitions us perfectly to Asia. Let's look at India. Over 1 billion people, rich history, incredible diversity, and a societal structure where the concept of marriage is so sacred it can easily turn into a hostage situation. Oh, absolutely. In India, the concept of log kya kahenge, which translates to what will people say, is a force of nature. It dictates everything. The morality of staying is entirely wrapped up in communal honor. If a woman leaves an abusive marriage, the stigma doesn't just attach to her. It attaches to her children. Right, it ruins the children's future marriage prospects, their social standing. The mother is essentially told that her bruises are the price of her daughter's future wedding. Exactly, the extended family will often step in not to rescue the victim, but to mediate and enforce endurance. They will say, adjust, compromise. He is the father of your children. Leaving is framed as a selfish act of westernized individualism. To stay is to be the virtuous, sacrificing mother. But the dark irony, and this is the core of our intelligence report, is what staying actually does to the children. Yes, let's drill down into that. Because the universal excuse is, I stayed for the kids. But neurologically, psychologically, what happens to a child raised in a war zone where the combatants are their parents? It rewires their brain. Children who witness domestic violence experience it as profound trauma, even if they are never physically struck themselves. They live in a state of hyperarousal, constantly reading the room for micro-expressions of rage. We are talking about elevated cortisol levels that literally inhibit brain development. By staying for the kids, you are inadvertently teaching them that love and terror are synonyms. You are programming your sons to think control is masculinity, and your daughters to think submission is love. It is like trying to protect your kids from the rain by locking them inside a burning house. Sure, they aren't getting wet, but they are slowly dying of smoke inhalation. That is a flawless way to put it. And we see that communal pressure to stay in the burning house in Africa too. Take Nigeria, the most populous country on the continent. You have a beautiful culture of communal child-rearing. It takes a village. But when domestic violence occurs, that same village often prioritizes the sanctity of the marriage over the safety of the individual. Religious leaders and family elders frequently counsel women to pray harder, to be more submissive, to fast for their husband's temperament. So the intelligence failure here is that the community acts as an enabler. The victim is completely isolated despite being surrounded by people. Yes, and isolation is the abuser's greatest weapon, which brings us to Oceania, Australia. Here, the isolation isn't just social, it is geographical. Right, because if you live in the outback, your nearest neighbor might be a kangaroo, and your abuser holds the keys to the only vehicle for 100 miles. Exactly. Australia has actually been pioneering in recognizing coercive control as a criminal offense. They are starting to understand that violence isn't always a black eye. Sometimes it is controlling the finances, the internet, the car keys. But the sheer vastness of the country means that if you decide to leave, the logistics are a nightmare. The morality of leaving is entangled with the literal survival mechanics of escaping the bush. Okay, we have covered 6 continents. We promised 7. We have to talk about Antarctica. Now, there is no indigenous population, no native family courts, but there are research stations. McMurdo Station, for example. What happens when love turns violent at the literal end of the earth? It is the ultimate pressure cooker. You have highly educated professionals living in extreme confinement, total darkness for half the year, and nowhere to go. You can't exactly storm out of the house to cool off when it is negative 80 degrees outside. While we don't have traditional family units raising kids on the ice, the dynamics of intimate partner violence absolutely still occur there. And it proves a terrifying point. Abuse isn't a product of poverty, or lack of education, or specific cultures. It is a product of power and control. Put humans in a box, cut off their exits, and someone will try to become the warden. That is chilling, no pun intended. It really strips away all the cultural excuses we just talked about. Whether you are dealing with American judges, Russian lawmakers, Indian aunties, or Antarctic isolation, the core mechanism is the same. The abuser leverages the victim's lack of options, and when kids are involved, the children are the ultimate leverage. They are. And that is why the moral debate of staying versus leaving is fundamentally flawed. It places the burden of the perfect choice entirely on the victim. If she stays, she is failing to protect them from the trauma of the environment. If she leaves, she is failing to protect them from the systemic retaliation of the courts, the culture, or the abuser's escalated violence. It is an impossible calculus. We demand that victims execute a flawless tactical extraction from a hostage situation, all while society actively arms the hostage taker. Exactly. The real intelligence takeaway here shouldn't be about judging the victim's choice. It should be about auditing our systems. Why do we make leaving so dangerous? Why do our courts prioritize a biological tie over a child's psychological safety? Until we change the infrastructure of escape, judging a parent for staying in a violent home is like judging a person for not jumping out of a 10th-story window when the stairs are blocked. You don't judge them for not jumping. You ask why the building doesn't have a fire escape. Precisely. And until society builds those fire escapes, whether that means reforming family courts in the US, changing cultural stigmas in Asia, or enforcing real consequences in Europe, parents will continue to make the agonizing choice to shield their kids with their own bodies, absorbing the blows so the children don't have to. A profound and sobering reality. We like to think of morality as black and white, but in the shadow of domestic violence, it is a million shades of survival. It leaves us with a heavy question. Are we, as a global society, the village that helps raise the child? Or are we the village that simply looks away while the house burns down? Something to think about until next time.